Today, we are told that when those 55 men walked into that Constitutional Convention, 4 months later they walked out with what history says is the greatest document ever penned by humankind. They call it the Miracle at Philadelphia. Why? Think about it for a moment. 55 men walked into that room from complete different walks of life. Many of them were from different countries. They had different cultures and background. They had different professions, lawyers and farmers and everything in between. They even had these men, I guess you could say that one of the most amazing things about them was they had one thing in common. They were very opinionated politicians. Now, I got a point for you. Has any of you ever been asked to serve on a committee of only 4 or 5 people who are very opinionated, and you're required to come up with a consensus? I mean, I have, and I'm telling you, that's what happened here. 55 men walked into that room and had to walk out with what eventually became, even out of their own mouth, they said it was a miracle. They said our Constitution was inspired from heaven. And it came after they did what? They argued. They presented their points. They argued some more, but then they finally arrived at consensus. They argued, they arrived at consensus. They argued, they arrived at consensus. Did you know that some people say today that it was a convention of compromise? Wrong. They didn't compromise on any but only 3 points. Can you imagine? They came out with a constitution that we follow today, and they arrived at a consensus on every single one of those points except for 3, and they compromised on those, and time worked those out. Every one of those men understood the remarkable nature that this Constitutional Convention was inspired from heaven. Listen to what some of themselves. I want to tell you what James Madison said, the father of the Constitution. He specifically said, "It is impossible for the man of pious reflection not to perceive in it a finger of the Almighty hand." And then Alexander Hamilton. This was the man who was the general and the great aide to George Washington during the Revolutionary War. He knew there was a miracle that happened at that time. He said, quote, "I sincerely esteem it a system which without the finger of God could never have been suggested and agreed upon by such a diversity of interest." And then the great military leader from South Carolina, Charles Pinckney, he used the big word itself, divine miracle. He said, "Nothing short of a divine miracle resulted in the creation of a constitution founded on just and holy principles, which is now the supreme law of the land." You know, I wish that I had been a fly on the wall in that Constitutional Convention when those men came forward and started to sign that document. James Madison, who stood right up at the very front next to George Washington, he took copious notes of everything that took place in the Constitutional Convention, and he said that when those men started to come forward, he says that was very emotional for many of them. I wish I had seen Benjamin Franklin, that wonderful old sage. He was the oldest member of the Constitutional Convention at 81 years of age. James Madison said that when he came forward to sign that document, that Benjamin Franklin was so moved by emotion that as he started to sign that document, James Madison said he looked at him and he said, "The old man wept." My friends, the founding fathers knew our Constitution and our unique form of government was inspired from heaven, and after even just a handful of a few of those stories, do you now start to understand why George Washington said specifically, "I am sure there never was a people who had more reason to acknowledge a divine interposition into their affairs than those of the United States"? I am absolutely certain that if the founding fathers were here, they would beg every single one of you in this room that when we are through with this meeting, go home and in your own private, humble ways, acknowledge to the heavens that our freedoms came from God, because they would say if you do not, they would be worried that if we have not already offended the Creator enough already through our ingratitude, that when the heavens start to withdraw and we flay about on our own, trying to solve our own problems, the founders would tell us you will continue to lose your freedoms at an avalanche rate, even compared to what you have seen in the past. And that is why I have absolutely no doubt that if the founders were here, they would say, if you're going to save America, we must first and foremost again acknowledge that our freedoms came from God.